So, the entire time we're talking about this, like, the primordial flood, the deluge and stuff, we're like, oh god, it's the Orby.
Yeah.
It kind of is.
That's what actually happened to Childe. He was just taken away by the Orbeez.
Greetings, travelers and Illuminati alike, and welcome to the Shade Chamber Tales of Teyvat Fontaine Archon Quest Collab Special. Tonight at the Opera Epiclese, the scribes of Tales of Teyvat and the hilly churls of the Shade Chamber shall join forces to discuss the Fontaine Archon Quest, a collaboration that has long been foretold by the Oratrice Mecanique D'Analyse Cardinale. My name is Beefy of the Shade Chamber, and they wouldn't let me bring in any outside food, so I stuck some fish and chips in my bra. And that's why they call it a brasserie.
Hi, I'm Al from Tales of Teyvat, and I broke the Oratrice Mecanique D'Analyse Cardinale.
I'm co-opting the Fountain of Lucine to make a perfect replica of myself in hopes of becoming the new Bogdanovs of Fontaine. I'm Break. I just hope that Oratrice Mecanique D'Analyse Cardinale doesn't judge my machinations too harshly.
Hi, I'm B, and when I was a kid, my dad told me that I'd never be good enough for the Oratrice Mecanique D'Analyse Cardinale. And now I'm on a Genshin Impact podcast. And yes, my dad's name is Arlecchino.
Hello, Papa!
I'm Jar, a Meropide prisoner forced to clean water beads from the sewers of Fontaine. The Oratrice Mecanique D'Analyse Cardinale doesn't become the Orbeez Mecanique D'Analyse Cardinale.
God.
And I'm Fiendster from Tales of Teyvat, and I was found guilty by the Oratrice Mecanique D'Analyse Cardinale of reading too much fan fiction, talking about albedo an abnormal amount, and ingraining my headcanons as actual lore.
If that's the
Disgusting.
criteria, Meropide must be, like, just packed.
That's a never-ending source of power right there.
Hi, I'm Tiff from Tales of Teyvat. I was tried by the Oratrice Mecanique. I knew I was going to be the one who's going to fuck it up.
No worries.
I was like, everybody said it so good. I'm like, I was waiting for Fiends to ruin it, and then she did it good.
Hey!
I actually got,
Hey!
yeah, I got pretty close to fucking up too.
How long did you practice it, Feeny?
Well, I spent at least 3 hours this morning at like 4 in the morning.
Hi, I'm Tiff from Tales of Teyvat. I was tried by the Oratrice Mecanique D'Analyse Cardinale for stalking Berry Puffier after their release from the underwater hospital. I just wanted to give them a little bit more food.
They said no.
He's such a hunky boy.
Hey, shout out to our listener, our buddy, our pal Michael, who during our stream told us that the Chinese name for Berry Puff is Crying Grape. When he grows up, his name is Crying Big Grape.
Oh, that sounds like a grape soda.
Oh, watch out. The Fonta people are going to go after him.
Oh, shit.
No!
And I'm the only hung juror, take that how you will, of the Oratrice Mecanique D'Analyse Cardinale. Wander.
Ugh.
Let's all, like, shotgun the things we have called the primordial water. French dip, no juice, grimace shake, Orbeez.
I called it Hypnique. You know that alcohol that has like glittery stuff in it?
Ooh, like the shit
It
I
looked
did?
just like it.
Oh,
Yes.
that's a
fuck
good
Yeah,
one.
yeah. The edible glitter.
Yes.
I called it the Dead Sea.
I'd just call it projectile barf because I feel like that's what made this actual regular water rise because it made no sense. As in all devouring narwhal that's like eating the primordial sea, you would think that the water would go down, but no.
Right.
Because like the energies, such roiling hydro energies will prove difficult for the planet's deep seas to digest. What? So the deep
Yeah.
seas are barfing?
We're going to drill down into some topics that both our podcasts agreed would be interesting to dive into.
Hey.
We also all agreed to
Oh.
have a drink before this recording session.
Oh shit.
But
Yes.
before we get into those topics, I think we were just gonna like pile on our overall just impressions of the Archon Quest. So a reminder, we are covering the Fontaine Archon Quest from 4.0 to 4.2.
Right.
You couldn't even say 4.2 without your skin crawling, could you?
Yeah.
Fifi?
No, 4.1 was worse. If we Thanos snapped 4.1 and we just went from 4.0 to 4.2, I think I would have had a better overall impression.
Yeah, I actually had the
Oh.
same thought as well. The second part of 4.1, after we left Meropide, so much of that was just like burdened by the fact that Meropide came before it. I'm like, it would have just been better served if we had had none of it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like Meropide was written in as a pause in the story, but the story already has a pause. It's the 6-week wait for the patch.
Yeah, literally.
Right.
You don't want to wait 6 weeks and then waste your players' time and energy in this. Like, I don't know if you've seen the Gollum game, but it's just what Meropide is. It's just
yeah.
like it takes place when he's imprisoned in Mordor, and it's just like you wake up, you get out of your cell, you do chores, you go back to bed. It sucks. That's what this was.
Isn't that
This
just real life? Except I'm not in a prison. I'm in my
Yeah.
house.
Exactly.
I mean, but at least in real life, you gotta enjoy the scenery a little bit.
That's
Yeah.
true.
At least like I can't remember what is it the first part of the Samara Archon Quest where we're doing like Groundhog's Day, but it reminded me of that, and I still really hate that part of the Samara Archon Quest because I'm so
Oh.
tired of the groundhog bullshit.
Mm.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
I
it.
don't totally blame you for that because, like, it is repetitive and you do have to
Mhm.
watch the same scenes over and over again. When I initially played it, I was sold on the intrigue of it because I really like figuring out Groundhog's loops and trying to figure out what was kind of going on with the meta plot. And I think they were kind of
Yeah.
banking on that a little bit with Meropide.
Right.
Mhm.
I think the biggest failing of it was that the secret rules were actually all just really, really stupid things that I don't even feel like really contributed to the characters that much
Yeah.
either. Like,
Exactly.
just for the record, like, Risley and Siegewin are great. Anytime I'm complaining about Meropide, they're not included in that.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
It's all the other
Uh,
subplots of Meropide. And it's like, I don't care about these cannibals now that I know they're not cannibals.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I wanted cannibals so bad.
there was a lot of like really interesting plots that you could tell in a prison setting, especially, in an area that's outside of the law that has to have its own law, that has all of these prisoner protection sort of rackets going on. But it turns out to not actually be anything interesting. And I'm like, a
And, like,
shame.
It has the added effect too of being like, oh, there's this other area where, like, instead of using the setting to reinforce like any idea you might have about how the law is like conducted in this part of the world, no, it's all just a bunch of dumb little secrets that have otherwise no commentary on like informal versus formal laws or any of the
Mhm.
themes or character or anything.
I will say, in defense of the marmalade, god damn it, Feeny.
Eh,
You got me.
The Palace of Marmalade.
The
It's a
Palace
great
of
place.
Marmalade. In defense of what they were trying to do, I loved how they were trying to implement that there are these secret rules, these secret, things that they have to abide by, because that's something very similar in modern day prisons where you have a code that you follow and that it's very different for people on the outside world to like kind of understand. And in a way, it makes its own form of justice and kind of translates to how justice is always going to be subjective. But they really fucked it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They could have focused it so much more with us just exploring people like, why are you here? Why do you feel justified to stay here? Some of it seemed like they were there for fraud. Who's there for murder?
Yeah,
I wanna know.
absolutely. And the fact that a former prisoner took it over is like a huge plot point that they could have looked into and like talked about justice from the inside
Yeah.
a little bit more.
Because
Exactly.
they just kind of glaze
Yeah.
over that whole part too, even
Mhm.
in the story quest.
Break, before we found out what the secret rules actually were, you had a really, really good interpretation of them that like fits way more into it being both like justice and France.
I want to hear this.
Yeah, I thought that like what they were going to do with it was like specifically the rule about working for 3 days in a row. Like I thought the reason that that rule was in place was it's like, okay, they're going to give you like a poisoned meal if you work 3 days in a row, because if you're setting some kind of precedent where everybody is working super hard without taking any breaks, then they're going to make sure you do take a break whether you want to or not by putting poison in your food and like taking you out for a little bit, so you have to go to the infirmary. Because it was like I was thinking it was like going to be some kind of prisoner solidarity thing where it's like, okay, there's nothing that's actually protecting us from taking legitimate breaks, and we also want everybody to have like this sort of equal approach to how you're doing work in the prison. But then it turned out it was just Siegeween trying to reward you and making weird food, and I'm like, I don't, as much as I like it when the game goes out of its way to give characters like little, touches here and there, I was like, I think it did a lot less for the world building in that specific case.
Yeah.
It was a red herring dead end of the plot that didn't even carry over. Like, that's what the second patch of the Sumeru Archon Quest felt like, that, because you lose all your momentum and you talk to Izak, the kid.
Drag queen kid,
Yes.
Yeah, and so
Yeah,
it's
but
like,
at least that was a payoff.
that's what I'm saying. It paid off, because the next patch you got the playable version of him in that shitty Nahida costume, and it was awesome.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
amazing.
This is like,
so good.
nothing pays off in Meropide. Like, Childe is somewhere else. The Fatui infiltration is a dead end. And Risley's stupid fucking airship that he embezzled prison's funds for, I thought that was going to be the stage for the final boss, or like a big showdown.
That
Like,
would have been
we're
Yeah.
gonna
cool.
we're gonna go on a fancy yacht. We're gonna like either fight the whale or fight Arlecchino. And it appears in a cutscene to save like 4 fucking people.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can see the Jade Chamber from Fontaine, so I just imagine as that was going on, like Beto and Ningguang were just like on the balcony drinking wine and like watching through binoculars, going, "Whoa,
Absolutely.
Like, what the?
holy
Beto's
shit!"
like,
is
I'm
that
glad
a-
my ship's not over there right now.
Yeah, until Beto saw Risley's ship and she was like, fuck, we gotta get over there right
What is
now.
that?
Yeah.
Is that flying?
She's like, fucking mine. I'm going to take that.
Ningguang's like, "Babe, we're on a flying ship."
The other thing about the fortress too was the fact that you start off walking in with that guy who's like basically like, screw you, this is gonna suck, I'm not repeating anything I say. And then you run into Risley and he's like, has he been treating you well? And the guy's like starstruck. He's like, oh my god, the Duke is here, oh my god. And then you have the option to like Alfonso his ass and either rat him out or be nice to him.
Yeah, and I loved the potential of that, like the prison politics.
Yeah.
I don't know. I often, with Genshin, it's hard to not like project more interesting characters onto the characters. And I'm like, okay, Risley's one of these guys who's clearly really kind and cordial, but he's also super corrupt, and he has like no qualms about making the system work for him, right? He's Mama Morton. Like,
Oh, he
like when he's
is?
like,
oh my god.
Yeah.
because he's like, I'm gonna allow a Fight Club ring to happen, but only if I get my cut, and like shit
Yeah.
like that. And I'm like, that's so good. That's a great
Mhm.
way to spin this like gentleman prison lord. But
And it-
instead,
yeah.
That's
just
I feel like they kind of set it up that way when they were even talking about it in the preview stream, where they're like, oh, the Fortress of Meropide is this prison sealed away underwater, completely, isolated from society, but everyone loves it there who goes there. Like, they never want to leave. And I remember we were talking about it off the podcast, and it was just like, are they describing Stockholm syndrome? Are they
Yeah.
what is this? Like, they wanted to have this really idyllic view of this setting, and I'm not sure why, because the theme of justice in any story is going to be inherently darker and a little grittier, because it gets down to, what do people deserve, what is right for them, for their actions, and for society. And it's like, there's never an easy answer to that. We can't just look at this prison and go, oh no, it's great though, it totally works, everyone comes in, they love their reformation so much that they don't want to leave, and then the people who do leave are just integrated back in. It's fine. It's like, if you're having a story that's about this weird sense of justice in this country, it's never going to be completely fine.
And I think that's also the product of like kind of the unwillingness to actually portray the setting as like dark enough to justify having a prison of that level. Like, of course people have to like Meropide, because no part of the setting is really that dark on screen. If it's
Yeah.
off screen, like, the
go
horses are off.
crazy.
But
Yeah.
if
Which
it's
is
on screen
surprising
though,
because there's so
like-
much murder in Fontaine.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a literal serial killer
Mhm.
that they bafflingly named after a real ass serial killer.
Yeah. It- but
Sachet.
that was whack. I get that they were probably like, Google, what's the French Jack the Ripper? Oh, this guy Vichet. But it would be like, oh, we solved the killer in Notlon who's throwing all those young men into a volcano. It's Dahmer. Like, why would you use a real name?
Meanwhile, you have like Lynette being human sex trafficked, which was also shocking.
Yeah, that
I was like,
crazy.
what?
I was not expecting that in like the Archon Quest. Just like that's horrific.
Yeah.
But it's so like Shakespearean that all these like I don't want to say like the exciting shit happens off stage, but a lot of the important and dark and real shit happens, quote unquote, off stage.
Yes. Right. That's something I've complained about like since Liyue. Because I feel like I personally think the Liyue Archon Quest is the worst for that reason, because all the pivotal stuff happens off screen. Inazuma, not so much. I think the only big thing off screen was the big battle where Tepe uses his powers and dies.
Yeah.
Oh, Tepe.
Sumeru, you are there for everything cool. Like everything interesting in Sumeru you see happen.
Right.
Fontaine, like half the stuff is off screen.
Yeah, that's true.
You're doing prison chores. You're fucking around doing whatever. And then like, oh, there was a riot. Oh, the floods are coming. Oh, these people died at Poisson. Like, I want to see that. You got the money to animate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually really
Yeah.
disappointed that we didn't get to see the animations from Poisson, especially with like Navia's besties dying.
Yeah.
Like not being able to see the
Yeah.
brother's death was not right.
Am I the only one though that when they showed Poisson after the tragedy that you went, wait, what's different? You all look terrible. Like clean it up.
One thing I like about Meropide, and that's the Caterpillar World Quest, and that's it.
Yeah.
Right,
That was good.
Yeah.
It had a
there's, like,
better take on justice than the rest of anything that happened in Meropide.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
I really did like the end cutscene though. I've been like, I'm a sucker on the cutscenes, on all of them. And this one didn't like, I just loved it all. I loved the drama of it. It was very cliche, but
Well, I was wondering though, is this kind of the region where you got the impression that like maybe the setting kind of like was the setting they were trying to establish was a little bit too large for the story they had?
Yes.
Like-
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because you
Definitely.
have influence of France, you have the Industrial Revolution like happening at this point, but there's a lot of like English shit happening as well. They had a lot of ideas and mushed them all together in a very small region right now.
Mhm.
But what's weird is, to me, it feels like all of those ideas had a really obvious way to smush them together and have it make sense, and it wasn't even taken. Like, even the role of the stage and of media. This is the first region where, like, news media is really big, and they even kind of imply, like, the Oratrice makes his measurement based on hype.
Yeah.
And, like, and so you go and think, oh, the stage aspect of this is going to be like getting the people emotionally invested regardless of what the truth is. You turn it into a soap opera and you get people to like treat the story that you're giving them as the truth. And yeah, we just watched Chicago, so of course it's like in the brain, but it's also the most obvious thing you do with it. And instead, what the stage ended up just being was like magic shit, like sleight of hand and like disguises and the idea of like acting to put on a facade. And that kind of overlaps with justice, but not as good as like, emotional manipulation, basically.
Absolutely. Because
Like it was all about misdirection, but not in a justicey way. It was just like, I don't know, a cover up that.
Small sidebar, I am a really big fan of how the initial trailer for Fontaine, where Arlecchino is chastising Linny and Lynette about, like, first and foremost being actors, was actually Focalor's Gambit.
Yeah,
Like, I am
Yes.
happy with at least, that and, like, the sleight of hand misdirection on that one. But yeah, usually it doesn't land. Yeah.
But to both of those points though, like I definitely think the media angle would have even still worked with how the AQ ended, like, because at the end it was about emotionally gaslighting a dragon into caring about people who wronged him.
I mean, for the region of justice, they could have really done what true justice is versus the court of public opinion's justice.
Exactly.
Like, there's this whole idea that they could have really gone with is like, witch trials. Like, oh, we don't like them. This is clearly, the truth. Like, being hype about like this person's obviously guilty and not taking the steps to find the true evidence for true justice. They could have done a lot of that, and that would have probably highlighted the very end of this Archon Quest better.
Yeah.
I think we got a little bit of that with Nouvelette's character quest, but like it feels like something that should have been more.
It's like, why didn't you put that in the world quest though?
I think the whole thing should have just been about Detective Paimon, because
It should have.
Yes.
I can watch her
that was definitely
showboat like a dork forever.
Yeah.
Those first, like the first Archon Quest of the region, where there was like the gathering evidence and then the doing the Phoenix Wright cases. It's like, oh, when that dropped, I was like, is this going to be every quest for the region? Because I'm not against that.
Yeah, I was so for it. My wishes were heard. I needed that Phoenix Wright moment in this fucking, part of Teyvat. What's not justifiable is that Yanfei's nowhere to be seen.
Right.
Yeah.
That would mean they'd have to write things for Yanfei, and they refuse to do anything interesting with her.
They
They
really
made Charlotte look just like her, and they're like, yeah, we won't even take that as a part of it.
They don't treat their post AQ characters the same at all.
No.
And I'm like, maybe the writers are not smart enough to write interesting legal dramas.
Oh, we know they're not.
Yeah.
They had one great one in 4.0, which fucked all the way through. It was so good. There was one ass grab, but it did introduce us to the concept of water that melts only the French, which is something I wish we had in real life.
Right.
It wasn't a very good mystery, but it was a phenomenal exposition device.
Like Break said, my qualms are not with the characters. I think the Fontaine characters are fucking great. It's just like, it's like you dumped a puzzle on the table and then you just kind of gave us the pieces that look the shiniest without making the whole puzzle.
Yeah.
And like the grace period is over. We're 3 Archon quests in past launch, and you've proven you've done better. So why this? Let's talk about stuff we like before we go on.
Yeah.
I love it when playables have beef with each other, and it was great to see Navia screaming at Neuvillette, and then Neuvillette cries.
Anything with Neuvillette and Navia breaks my fucking heart so bad.
They're very similar characters. Like, they're very, I want everything to be right in the world. I want people to be happy. I want justice to be served. And they do that at the risk of their own well-being. Like, Navia, I mean, she almost died in the Archon line. Her adopted family died. She had to go undercover and figure out what actually happened to her father, while the quote-unquote murderer of her father like stalked her to make sure that she was okay.
They tried to poison her at the restaurant,
Yeah.
tried to assassinate her with Gardamex. Like, she suffered.
I feel like Navia is like the second pass they've had at doing like a legacy burdened heiress character, and they did such a good job.
Yeah, she's cool, Ayaka.
Yeah, exactly. She's Ayaka who is afraid to get her socks wet.
Not the socks.
And again, that's more potential they had on the table, because she could have been the foil to Neuvillette, who's like, he represents, like justice from the paradigm from on high. That's like, it's bureaucratic and it doesn't really serve the people. And then she's like, the Spina di Rosula, they portray themselves as like, for the people and the people's justice. They're also very clearly the mafia.
They are very clearly the mafia.
Yes.
And like, that would have been a really interesting dynamic, is like, is she serving justice to the people better than he is, versus how justice is done in Meropide.
Yeah.
There's no examination of anything. It's just like, is it just to let the Fonch people melt?
And I think the weirdest thing about Navia vis-a-vis like the mafia princess angle is like, it's never really questioned that like, hey, you're acting extrajudiciously. Like, is this okay? Every time she does, they praise her for her help.
I love it.
Like, vigilante justice in Fontaine is absolutely legal and appreciated.
Well, it's like how the Yakuza like embed themselves in local communities, and the police are like, well, they help out, they lighten our load. You know,
Mhm.
they're not really hurting anyone except for their own shit, so we just give them a pass. The idea of like she entrenches herself in community and infrastructure makes
Yeah.
it harder to suss her out.
Yeah, and you know it's
There's
go
a
ahead.
little thought bubble coming out of my head that's like the Navia everywhere system.
Yeah.
Imagine.
They
She
also
pops out of a manhole.
We know she lives in the Fleuve Cendra like half the year.
Yeah.
She winters in the sewers. Okay, the Fleuve Cendra ended up being the most fucking inconsequential part of the AQ. Like,
Right.
to say nothing of the regions that were unlocked that we didn't go to in the AQ, like the entire institute that got
Yeah.
blown up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why would you show kind of like, you know, the white and black cities? This is a region where purportedly duality is a theme, and it's like you do have like the fancy people on top and then like the grittier working guys on the bottom. And I forget if they say like things are hard for the people in Fleuve Cendra, but I think that's kind of like
It's certainly
implied.
implied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
because they live in the fucking sewers, and I think I read in some lore text people have to fight off alligators down there sometimes.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Look, sometimes in Florida and in France, you gotta beat up a fucking gator.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, we're okay with this. We're okay with this sharp binary between, you know, Disneyland Paris on the surface and fucking Revachol from Disco Elysium
Oh,
underneath.
I wish it was
Oh my
Revachol.
god.
It wishes it was Revachol.
Yeah, I actually am like not necessarily the largest fan of Fontaine's design as a city. I actually feel like it's kind of like the city itself is kind of one of the weaker ones just because it's tiered in a weird way.
Yeah, I think we'll get into aesthetics and design in our own separate episode because I have a lot to say and complain about.
Yeah.
One of the things that they've really gotten good about, especially since Sumeru, is just writing emotional reactions in their characters. Like Navia was the heart and soul of the Archon Quest. Like,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
when she cried, everyone was crying, and they knew how to
Yeah.
milk that because she cried at least 3 times.
She had 3 good reasons for crying.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like the part in like after the disaster at Poisson when she's like, I'm sorry, I really don't usually cry. And I'm like, I believe you. We have seen you on the 3 worst days of your life.
Quite
And, like,
literally.
The voice acting was incredible in all of those scenes. Like the voice actress was really doing a good job to emote that and convey that like just dread and sorrow and sadness to the player. Like I think they've done such a good job in being able to convey the emotional tones that they're trying to go for. They just get a little lost in the weeds when it comes to like the logic of getting there.
Shout out, however, to the biggest emotional whiplash of the entire game, which is when you go to Poisson post-disaster, you see a man absolutely hysterical about his daughter dying and screaming for her.
I'm not young anymore. How will I survive on my own? My Desiree!
And Paimon just turns to you and is like, wow, you look sad.
He looks pretty sad.
Oh my
Uh,
That was the worst part of the whole game.
Yeah, Paimon is exactly how to say it. Just fucking
was-
shut up, Paimon
I
sometimes.
was so done with her this AQ. You know what's
Mhm.
interesting that I think about it at Fontaine? Like we see the majority of those characters at their worst, and that's something I really liked.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like
I mean-
I think like especially in the early days where everyone was just kind of blandly perfect, it is cool to see all these characters struggling. It's also very French.
Yeah.
yeah.
The melodrama.
Oh my god.
Mhm.
You know, Blaine, my people know very much about suffering.
Oh, and what people are those? Montrealians?
Oh, that was cute how Rosalie and Cloran were taking bets on
Yeah.
like how fast
Yeah.
Nublet was gonna shut it down. And then
Yeah.
we're all like, oh, they fucking, oh my god, there's a male-female pairing in Genshin.
Oh my
That we
Yeah.
like.
I
Die.
will say, I in my heart of hearts, I do think they're you know a throuble.
Oh, are you suggesting a, how you say, ménage à trois?
Really? You're really asking her to say menage a trois? It's a fucking French word, you little bitch!
No.
We're all
We know
just
they're
together.
a throuple because like obviously we're all projecting our fun fan interpretations on this, but when Navia is speaking to Cloran at the end of the AQ,
Mhm.
Oh.
and she's like, yeah, he you know, we had tea, and she's like, did you like his tea?
Oh,
the question of like, what did you think of the tea or how was the tea was just her asking like, was the dick good? Like, what did you think?
Yeah.
Like tea and Fontaine absolutely has the same meaning as chess and leeway.
Claren's like tone there was like, I'm so relieved she's also fucking him now. It's not weird.
No, yeah.
I'm curious of what does chess mean in Mondstadt, because D-Luke also likes to play chess.
No one in Mondstadt is smart enough to play chess. Okay.
I mean, D-Luke lives close enough to the border of leeway to where he's probably heard people use the term but didn't understand what it actually meant.
So he tried
he's-
to buy a chessboard, but it really was just a checkers set.
He went to go buy a chessboard and the chess shop was like, oh, is this for a little special someone in your life? He's like, no, what?
Like, this is for my table. I was told it would make me look cool.
And they're like, you leave your chessboard on the table where people can see it? Are you a pervert?
It was fun to see Linny like trying to threaten Risley too. Like I was like, oh shit, like he's just lost his mind
That was
because
such a good scene.
all of his siblings are in trouble, and then Sijuin shot him, so it was fine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
with the
right.
gun.
Worst day.
Bang, bang.
She shot him
Tom
with
down
a
juice.
trank gun like a rampaging velociraptor.
Yes.
I love the siblings.
Yeah.
I love it when they hug each other in the infirmary. It's so cute.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
You're right that they did an amazing job of character building, regardless of how built out we get to see some of those characters. There's so much intrigue in even the 4 stars of like Fremine.
Like
Yeah.
even Charlotte, who probably had the least amount of screen time in that AQ, had like a really beautifully poignant line when you're like, say the world was going to end tomorrow, what would you do? And she's like, I would keep working on our interview, because even if I die, if I do everything to get it out there, it's gonna like, that would make history and that would make me immortal. And I'm like, that's cool, dude.
Mm-hmm.
I think that since Sumeru, they've really done a good job at like shoring up the character relations. Like everyone in a region at this point, if they're introduced during the AQ, they feel like they're kind of connected to one another in a way that's fairly believable. Like you have like even Sijuan, it's like, oh, she has a relationship with Risley, but also she has a close relationship with Nivelette.
Yeah.
And those are characters who don't like interact on screen, but he asks about her, and
my
it's
God.
clear that there's like a relationship there.
The way his voice
Yeah.
changes when you mention Sijuan to him, and it's so cute. He's like, "Oh, Sijuan, how is she doing?"
Yeah.
It's like he's such a good stepfather to these slug children.
He's
I love
such
it.
a fucking
Yeah.
dilf, man.
He's
Yeah.
a peepaw. He is
The people.
a big
Gilf,
grandpa.
if you will. I don't know. I just want to ride that dragon dick.
They
He
keep
is
saying
God.
all
Thank
their
you.
dragons are old grandpas. All of them.
Hey, Bad Dragon, hit us up. We have some product concepts we'd like to sell you.
We have a lot, actually. In fact, can you just prorate me?
We singled out a couple topics to talk about more specifically and kind of deep dive into. The first of which being that old man. He goes by many names: Nivelette, Nervalette, Norbledorf, Noodly Boop, Nubliette, Nublet, Peepaw,
Peepaw, yeah.
Drampa.
Drampa,
The gilf.
and Wet Frollo.
Right,
My
Wet Frog.
favorite.
I was kind of surprised by this guy.
He is now my favorite man in Genshin. I love him so much.
Yeah, I do too.
When I initially saw him in the preview, I was just like, oh, okay, this is going to be like the super severe Justicar guy. And then I was like, oh, but this is Genshin. They're going to do more stuff with him. And like, sure enough, you think he's going to be super severe, but you're watching Lenny's magic show with him and you're like, do you know Lenny? And he's like, no, but Lenny seems cool to hang out with. And it's like, oh yeah, there it is. There it is.
Yeah.
Dad that doesn't know what to do in social situations.
Yeah.
He is such like the Zhongli upgrade that it's kind of obscene.
Yes.
Like, first of
Mm.
all, he's an actual dragon and not just an adeptus that looks like one.
Right.
Second of all, he's erudite and he's like into fancier things, but he doesn't waste your time or your mora. He's just like, he invites you to wine tasting. When's the last time Zhongli ever invited us to anything that he paid for, right?
Never.
Yeah, he's not just
Never.
a bourgeois parasite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best Zhongli line. Nivelette's also voiced by Ray Chase, who's just like one of the greats of this like new blood LA voice actor crop. I've been really looking forward to him having a role in Genshin.
Yeah, he's awesome.
He's so fucking good.
Yeah,
And
really
he's
knocked it out of the
funny.
park.
He's so funny. I love characters like him and A that are like, they are stoic, but they can also just be really funny because like of their stoicism. And he just has such good line reads, like the way he says tomato ketchup in one of his like voice lines. Because in Fontaine, he tells you it's illegal to just eat ketchup out of the bottle.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Okay, no, out of the bottle. Okay, never mind. Because I was thinking earlier about like how a weird French thing is like being a little bit weird about ketchup.
My favorite thing about Nouvelette though is how sentimental he is.
Yeah.
Because he has that like air of majesty about him, but then he turns around and is just so in love with the Melusines and like tries to take care of them. And yeah, I really love that about him.
That was the aspect of his character that like actually most caught me off guard, just like how sad he would be across the whole storyline.
Yeah.
He is a sad man.
Don't cry, Hydro
sad dragon
Archon.
man.
Although I feel like I should have seen it coming, given that like, even though we don't have an England region, this is kind of the region where they're like, let's lean into whatever Regency tropes we can lean into, right down to having like an emotionally distant but sentimental man.
We can pretend that Meropide's England because the food sucks.
Yeah,
But yeah, he is absolutely a Darcy. I feel like Darcy's kind of what they wanted to do for D-Luke.
Yeah.
But like
yeah,
they did like Darcy in his older years for Nouvelette.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyone who draws him like looking over 50 with mutton chops is my fucking savior. This is how he looks in my head. He is a grandpa.
Peepaw.
I love my peepaw so much.
I will say something really interesting I read online, and I don't know how true it is, so take it with a grain of salt. But Ray Chase, like halfway through recording, realized that he was totally portraying Nouvelette wrong, and he actually went back and like re-recorded.
I could believe that.
And I think that's like such dedication, and we're saying all these things we love about the character, and it's like, damn, like I wonder what the other voice recordings sounded like.
I think we could probably guess because it probably had less of that sentimentality. Just like Break said, really easy to just see Nouvelette as this very like austere, stern figure.
Right.
The warmth, but also the severity as need be. Like he's just so great.
Yeah, they did a good job.
Something else that I found really interesting about Nouvelette's character is when you first meet him, you assume that he is the all-knowing person in the nation, like the Yaimiko of sorts.
Oh, that's a good point.
And he's not. Like, he's like, I have no idea what Farina's up to. I don't know what type of secret she's keeping from me. And I don't have most of my memories. And I'm like, excuse me?
I was really nervous that they were really trying to make us think that Nouvelette was the real Archon.
Yeah.
And that it was going to be like, because I feel like anyone who has their ear to the ground a little bit was instantly like, oh, that's the dragon. That's a dragon. And
yeah, look at him.
And
he's
I was like,
are they really
gonna try to like make us think that he's the Archon, and then we're supposed to be surprised that he's the dragon? So I was glad that they were very quickly like, oh, by the way, I'm the dragon, and there was some other mystery behind Farina.
Yeah.
And we got to see him ascend to full sovereignty, like on the stage. I think like ever since Inazuma, people have loved the idea of a fake out Archon, or it's like Raiden's not the real Archon, it's Yaimiko.
Right.
Nahida's not the real Archon. I've seen people who are like, I'll hate them, her predecessor, and I'm like, shut up.
Yeah,
I remember seeing those too.
Stop wanting men to be things. But we actually got that in Nouvelette, and it was very well deserved.
Yeah.
In that, he's not literally the Archon, but he ends up taking the godhood. So, as we've known since Enkanomiya, it's like dragons are basically like the apex of an elemental being, right? Like on the lower end of elemental manifestations, you have slimes, and then like the highest possible thing they could be is a dragon, and the lord of that is the sovereign.
And they're the original inhabitants of Teyvat.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are the native species of Teyvat. Pre first contact with the usurpers, with the Celestian, whatever.
Yeah, before the primordial one came in and committed genocide.
Oh my god. Wow, colonizer.
We do know that the original Hydro Dragon was killed, and then Egeria was created to replace the Hydro Dragon as like the heart of the Primordial Sea, and all of that jazz. And it's like, okay, so when did Nouvelette happen? Because we have like thousands of years probably where the Hydro Dragon was gone.
He took the position 400 years ago. And like that's a number that keeps coming up. I think ever since Scaramouche, we start to see 400 appear now, and it's like, oh, okay, like we're kind of fleshing out the history between the Cataclysm and now.
Yeah, I think it's because they want to give themselves some breathing room between the Cataclysm and what immediately happened afterwards.
Like, do you think there was a possible reincarnation that passed prior to Nouvelette?
I think so, because like now we go back to Enkanomiya, where they talk about they're like basically the stock of the water Vishaps has become so like diluted that there's no way the next sovereign would reincarnate in dragon form. It would be a human.
Yes.
So there might have been something between like the Hydro sovereign of Egeria's day and Nouvelette. R.I.P. the 3 years we thought for sure it would be Kokomi.
Yeah.
She still hasn't jumped over the gate yet. She still hasn't, gotten to dragon form yet. She's still just a goldfish.
Kokomi will never financially recover from the Nouvelette revelation.
That's true.
It's like, oh, we thought that she was like, gonna be this like 11th hour thing in the Inazuma Archon Quest Part 2 where she unleashes her full like sovereign powers on the fight against Narukami. No, she's just Greek.
Yeah.
Sometimes you wonder if someone has a lot of hidden potential or power, and then you realize they're just Greek. Yeah, I think that, like, if I remember correctly, I don't remember if it was confirmed that Dvalin was the sovereign as well for Animo. I feel like
I don't think it was.
I don't think it was.
Yeah, I don't think it ever was.
I'm never
Yeah.
clear on which dragons are which, really.
He just
we
a
know
guy.
we know Apep is the original Dendro
Yeah.
sovereign.
Yeah. He was the
Um,
first locked in.
With
Mhm.
Azdaha too, I think Azdaha was just the kind of, if I'm remembering correctly, was like a beast created that Zhongli like befriended, and then
Mhm.
he lost his mind basically, as they
It's
all
really
do in Liyue.
ambiguous.
I mean,
Yeah.
but they also call him a Lord of Vishaps. Like, he is a dragon, I think.
Yeah. Someone will have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. If you know, please comment or send in your reply. Engagement.
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 Yay.
As long as it's butt crack.
It is about a butthole that
Okay.
Oh, are we talking about Risley? Let's go.
Yeah. No, we're talking about Rhine-Daughter opening a butthole trying to resurrect the dragons, and that's why they're reincarnated exactly when the cataclysm happened.
Oh,
That I
that's
could
an
believe.
interesting one.
That would
And I
make a lot
mean,
of sense
probably-
too.
Yeah, that
Because
has some-
Conria hated the gods, so they're like, who's the god's biggest enemy? The dragon.
Dragons.
Yeah.
Yeah, not only that, but also like the Archon Quest confirmed that like Gold is someone who is motivated by the pursuit of perfection. And then the World Quests are like, yeah, she doesn't actually create consciousness. There are instances where she pulls like a consciousness from the abyss.
Yeah. I
But-
guess it's a good question is, does Durin count as a real dragon then? Or is he also just kind of a dragon-shaped thing that Gold made and
Right.
like gave his soul?
But
Yeah.
there's also the idea that when looking to Chinese folklore and Chinese symbols of perfection, dragons and phoenixes were used by the royal family as a way to be the closest to God and to
Right.
basically perfection. It could be kind of like Gold is striving for perfection. What is perfection? The original dragons.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
But-
that would make a lot of sense too, because if I'm remembering correctly, Piero is originally from Conria, and
Yeah.
it would make sense because you guys asked us a wonderful question in our last podcast episode about like, do we think the Fatui is like in the right or wrong? And it's like, well, if they are trying to bring the dragon sovereigns back to life and they're collecting all the gnosises, because now we've learned that the gnosises have the dragon's power in them, and they can only become full dragons again if they get the gnosis back.
Well, it's
yeah,
not the gnosis, it's
yeah,
the
it's-
throne.
Yeah,
Mhm.
It's the throne.
Oh, yeah.
The gnosis, the gnosi, I can't talk. I
The
butchered
no
that.
schwa.
The no
The
see, the no
Noswa?
yeah.
My pet project is to get people to pronounce the GN in Gnosis like the GN in Yoki.
Gnosis.
Yosis.
Just
The
delicious.
gnosis.
The Gnosis.
Gnosis. But the Gnosi, are basically the remains, like chopped up remains of the third descender. And
Yeah.
I know B
Oh.
and I have a theory that the third descender is the Dragon King returned.
Yeah, that's
That would
one
make sense.
theory.
That's
like,
weird that he would
Nibelung.
descend though, because like I feel like the one thing we know about dragons is that they are indigenous to this plane of existence, right?
But they did during the first, or what we think is like the Great War between the usurper, the primordial one, and the dragons. The king of the dragons had to leave the world.
Well, I think
to-
that he was killed, right?
Oh shit.
When they first fought, he went
Mhm.
and obtained power from outside the world, implying that he actually got power from the abyss.
Mhm.
But then they fought and he was defeated. I guess we don't know for sure if he died or if it just says he was defeated, I think. But
Mhm.
yeah, so like the theory could be like if he was defeated or sent back out into the abyss, then maybe he came back and tried to take back the night, but then, lost again.
That makes I did not know that Nibelung left the plane. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And it's not clear if it was to the abyss or to like maybe a different world altogether.
Maybe you went to KFC with Alice.
Because again, the dragons are part of some of the earliest Teyvat in history. It's so amazing that we get another sovereign. We have a Pep, and a Pep is kind of like an asshole, but we I mean, it's just kind of like a fight and a thing for exposition and some lore.
Yeah, we fight the bok choy in his stomach, but he's
Yeah.
not engaged with the world in the present day. Like Nivilette's gift is that he understands the hearts of the people, so he can be a
Mhm.
true sovereign in that he like is the authority of all the people in his land.
He's more like a god,
Yeah.
a true god.
Now that he has the power back over the primordial sea, because that's
Wait,
like
does
a
he?
thing for the Hydro
Wait, the whole
sovereign.
sea?
Yes.
The primordial sea,
Yeah.
yeah. Like he has power over it.
Yeah.
What the
So
fuck?
is he gonna bring back all those people that got murdered by Vache?
I mean,
Re-separate them out of the sea and like create them as
Yeah.
humans again?
They're
That's
gonna
what's
be
crazy.
reborn.
okay,
Like,
if
they're
you
not
want to
even
talk about
dead.
things that are like prime fodder for Archon Quest Part 2, like
Mhm.
that's it right there.
That would be cool.
Okay, I was misunderstanding. I thought that the primordial sea was something that all dragons were kind of linked to.
No.
Not that we know
Bummer.
of yet. Who freaking knows at this rate?
Well, now my shit's all shot, but I'm gonna say it anyway. We know MiHoYo, spoiler alert, loves their comparative mythology. And so the conflation of a primordial sea and the dragons is of course that goes back to the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish.
Yeah.
Oh my god, yes!
There are a couple creation myths where you just start with water. Like even the Bible starts with like water. And
Mhm.
I think that goes back to the Babylonian myth in which at the beginning before the world there is just this primordial ocean lorded over by Tiamat, the dragon goddess, and she ends up being kind of the building blocks of what the world is because she is killed and her like corpse gets divvied up into different aspects of existence, right? It's like, oh, her blood is rivers and her, her scales are hills, whatever the fuck. So keep an eye on that space because they are definitely doing some shit with that.
Interesting too,
Mhm.
because Nuvalette loves to taste test water from around Teyvat.
He remembers some things about being a dragon because he says there's a custom where you would
Yeah.
drink a fallen dragon, which is
Ew.
just a Dune ripoff.
I hate
Yeah.
it.
I hate Focalor. I hate her so much. I hate her so fucking much. I think she's the worst person we have ever been told to like.
100%.
Oh my god, we'll get into her later. Like, Farina.
All right, Farina's my Blorbo. Farina is number one. I will fight anyone.
So, every Archon like gives us a first impression and then we find out how sad they really are. So we were expecting that. Like Farina comes in and she's this blustering little goblin. She's like a consummate politician. She's just lying, spinning, deflecting, and she's fucking great. And it's like, okay, the shoe's gonna drop and we're gonna find out how sad she actually is, right? That's how it goes. I don't think I was prepared for the level of sadness that
Oh my
came
God.
out of Farina's like true revelation.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
No, I made note of the voice actor Amberly Connors, shoot. But yeah, one of the best voice performances in the entire game. She had such good range on
Yeah.
every like mood of Furina, and even differentiating any of Furina's like sort of moods with Focalor's entire personality. Like that was great.
Like one of the things that is revealed after her fall from grace is it's like, well, she was playing up her own character, but it wasn't a fabrication, it was just an exaggeration.
Yeah.
And I love that she's such like a theater kid in a way, but and that
Oh yeah.
they're playing with like her existential crisis in the same way that like high schoolers go through.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that's when they start being almost little adults and having some brain autonomy. That's kind of where she is. Like she's been kept
Yeah.
emotionally stunted her whole life, forced to be.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I do appreciate like one thing about her character as well. Both she and the Oceanids by the end of the AQ are very Little Mermaid coded, but like that comes down to like she literally can't speak.
Oh,
But like it's not in a way where she can't vocalize. It's more like, oh no, she literally can't like express what's actually going on because then that causes consequences. Yeah.
Yeah, even in the hypothetical of her own mind, where she is the closest to being able to reach out to someone because there's like the one safe person to talk to, and she still pulls back at the very end and goes right back into the fake personality, was a really, really good character moment because it was both like, you know, hyper depressing, but it was also like, here's the actual like level of mental fortitude she has to go through or like had to develop for herself. Because even though this is just going to hurt her more, she's still like, you know, laser focused on keeping the secret.
her fate is outrageously cruel and almost maliciously so. Like, I don't think any character has been set up to fail as hard as Furina.
Yeah.
Like, if we think of all the characters with the tragic past and the bad parent figures, like A and Arlecchino look like mother and father of the year compared to Focalor.
Oh, 100%.
Of all the suffering characters in Genshin, it's usually because of neglect. This is like, I set you up to fail on purpose.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Focalor is like, I'm gonna make her incompetent on purpose. I'm not gonna fill her in on anything with my plot and just have her like keep lying and spinning and covering for me, but not giving her a good enough explanation. I'm not going to give her any powers that can give her any kind of credibility. And despite making her, for all intents and purposes, human, I'm going to make her immortal, which a human person is not equipped to deal with, to the point that Dainsleif calls his immortality a curse.
Yeah.
Oh my god, the part where she meets the descendant of someone that she met and she's just like open-eyed crying. I'm
It
like,
was so sad.
she is so done. This is the big problem I had with the 4.2 leg of the AQ. Their delivery on Furina is so inconsistent that it's like, if you wanted her to exit stage left because she's an imposter and not the focus of this, why did you make her so horrifyingly sympathetic? Why did you give us the stage show where it's like her soliloquy is like the emotional climax of the entire AQ? I was literally like queasy knowing how much she suffered after that. All Traveler says when they watch it is, this is great. Maybe she'll squeal some intel. And then
How
like
fucking rude.
And she doesn't get any closure at the end of the AQ. She's just run out of town in disgrace, which would be fine and it would fit her. But why did you make her the saddest person ever before that?
Yeah, that was really disappointing.
I think one of the things that just like tore a huge hole in my heart as far as the way the AQ ended she needed a scene where she reconciled with Neuvillette.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because like
Yeah.
the whole AQ is them going in opposite directions. Throughout his life, he's becoming more and more open to the hearts of the people. He understands humanity more. Over her life, she's becoming more and more distant and detached. They're the only people who have known each other for this long. He's the only person besides the Traveler that she could have possibly opened up her secrets to. And like, as we see in his story quest, like she leaves him an encouraging letter and they're clearly fond of each other. And just like it felt so whack that like not only do they not have a point of reconciliation at the end or he's like, yo, I get you, like they don't even have any interaction at that point. There's no falling out, there's no making amends. It just like he's like, she flew the coop, whatever.
Yeah.
That was nuts.
I feel like too, Neuvillette honestly owed Farina an apology in the end. Like, I didn't know what you were going through type of thing. Because, like, let's be honest, when Neuvillette is like, yeah, you're on trial, Farina, like, that feels like such a deception.
Yeah.
That was rough.
Yeah.
That's Peepaw putting you on trial. Like, that's not right.
I was mad at us. I was like, wait, what did we do? Did we trick her into this? Like, I was totally mad at the Traveler for
that scene was crazy.
deceiving her.
Yeah. Well, and then like when the Traveler is in her memories, like watching that story play out, he like sees the scene again where she might spill the beans to him, and then she like holds herself back because she knows that if she doesn't, like the world is going to end, or her world is going to end, basically. And his reaction is just kind of like, ugh, like disgust, like
bitch. Somebody help this sad Disneyland cast member who has been stuck in the Mickey Mouse costume for 500 years.
Mm-hmm.
What about the marketing? They always sell stuff with the Archons as like a group. And in the sitcom situation where the Archons are together in a group, Farina is a lot more appealing in that dynamic than Neuvillette. I expected it to go like she would become his secretary or like his delegate. Like even down to the fact that her post AQ outfit is black, the color of his attire. Like I could see her working for him and being like his ambassador to the Archons in the world.
I think because the Archons hold her in such a high respect, they are still gonna look at her as a Hydro Archon. And I think regardless, because Focalors looks exactly like Farina, like they could really say it's a Focalor that they're showing off, and they're actually keeping an Archon in the mix by doing that too.
Yeah.
So I don't think they'll switch it up. I honestly would hope that we would get Focalor's gorgeous outfit on some sort of PR, but that's just me. I do think
Focalor deserves nothing. She doesn't get to be friends with the Archons. But also, like, how fun would it be if we get events where all the Archons are together and Farina is there and she has to just lie her ass off?
Yeah, and she's still playing.
And Neuvillette has to be like her secretary, and they just have this dynamic where they're both bullshitting. Yeah.
I think they're still going to push Farina because the thing is, for newcomers, that's still a plot twist. So it actually drives home the lie even more if she shows up in more of the promo art.
Yeah.
Also, she has the Mickey Mouse divine. She is the marketable character.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. She's the brand.
In lore, she's also a celebrity as well. Like, even if like her base is a bit broken after the AQ is done, there's sort of an equal measure of people who are in support of her, as well as like, visible people who want to start riots around her. So it's a case where she's still a public-facing figure, disgraced though she may be, right?
Yeah.
I think that they did a pretty good job sort of establishing, like, at the very least, she can still be a public-facing character, and to that end, like, on a mascot / mascot political level, she could still potentially have, like, some Archon roles.
Oh, this is really, I've never read the Archon's lines about Farina, and they're all like, basically mad respect, you're an honorary god. And it's like, okay, that's how marketing can win.
Yeah.
But
honorary knight, honorary god.
It's super cool how all the gods have lines about her. She has no lines about the gods, and Neuvillette is the one that has lines about all the gods, and he's like, I'm gonna fucking get them. And then you get to Nahida, he's like, yeah, she's all right. She went through a lot.
No,
Yeah.
it's
Like,
that
I
one
get it.
scene from that movie, like fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. You're cool. Fuck you. I'm out.
I don't understand why, because first of all, Focalor creates Farina by separating her own divinity out of that human body, right? So you have like
Yeah.
the regular
Yeah,
human version of her, which is like a whole other person with a whole different consciousness. Because I'm assuming other archons can do this, and why would they even stick around in a human body?
The
I
thing
think
is,
that was
I
like
mean,
an Oceanid thing.
I'm not
Mhm.
sure if it was, because I think it's one of those ambiguous powers where it's like Yai mentioned that she's the one who taught A how to be able to separate her consciousness and put it inside an object.
Mhm.
So like
Mhm.
maybe
But the ability to separate and rejoin as entities has always been something innate to Oceanids.
Right.
From
I
like
think-
Rodia splitting into the animals that beat us up to, you know, what's her face from the summer event splitting into like a bunch of, you know, Disneyland cast members. Like that is definitely something that Oceanids have not had any trouble pulling off, whereas A, being, you know, a shoe yoke, I might need extra teaching.
I wouldn't completely though rule out the idea that the other archons could do it, because the thing with Focalors is that she was also young. So she, like, the prior archon died, she took over, and she literally was like given this file of like crimes against humanity from Celestia, and they like fucking figure it out. She was like given this bad plate, and she had to
Mhm.
figure something out to do quickly in order to get Celestia off her ass. Where the other archons have been gods for so long, like if you go back and read their voice lines about Focalor, they're like, we admire Farina. Like they are like, Farina is stronger than all of us, basically. So I think those gods know better than to do that, and they care a little bit more about humanity. Where Focalors felt like she was saving her humanity by
Mhm.
torturing Farina.
I wanted to bring up how Farina's suffering kind of parallels the entirety of the Prometheus myth.
Oh.
And I got this because I was like, there's too much Roman and Greek influence, like story-wise. Because there's also like, you know, the King Arthur parallel in some of the world quests that we can call to, but that's for a different time.
Yes.
But this idea of like the original sin, which was kind of, at least to Egeria, seemed pretty justified. Like her people, the Oceanids, wanted to be able, you know, they wanted to Little Mermaid themselves. They wanted to go up on the surface. And so the full like Prometheus myth is Prometheus to like settle, you know, what mortals are going to offer the gods for, you know, like favors and stuff. Like what are they going to sacrifice? He kind of played a trick, which was, do you want an ox stomach with the inside being like this delicious steak, or do you want bones wrapped in very, very hot fat? And of course Zeus picked what looked most appetizing, the fat, and he was so mad that the mortals were getting the better part rather than the not so good part that he took away fire. He like disabled it.
What a bitch.
Because they knew how to make it at that point. They just could not produce it anymore. So Prometheus steals the fire, does that, and then is punished by Zeus by like forcing him. I think he's trapped on a rock, and then an eagle every morning until the sun sets is constantly eating out his intestines and organs. And that is kind of like, with Farina, she can never catch a break. And the only time she doesn't have to act and pretend and suffer is when she's asleep, because Celestia, you know, a sleeping archon is not going to necessarily draw the eyes. And so her waking hours are her suffering. Prometheus understands that like what he did was, I mean, it wasn't fucked up. It was a trick played on Zeus that he specifically did. So the humans
for the sake of the humans.
For the sake of the humans, and the humans are being punished for something he did. And Egeria, in that way, created new life, which should have been, God should be able to create new life, because what do gods do? They create. But apparently that's only allowed in Celestia, which is interesting.
It depends
But-
on the god.
Yeah, very true, very true. And with Egeria, she created the original sin, created the Oceanids, and made them human. And as punishment, they are doomed to this fate of returning back to the primordial sea.
The Fontaine people of today don't even know that they were Oceanids. Like,
I love that guy in the scene of the reveal. He's like, I'm gonna pretend I didn't hear that. I'm like, yeah, me too, bud.
Yeah.
literally.
I was like, it's too much. It's too much.
Egeria cheated on her homework, and she should have gotten a couple like real human followers so that Celestia wouldn't be like, Egeria, where's your people? And she's like, here's my people. And Celestia's like, human people, Egeria.
She's like,
Humans.
What's a human?
No, she's like, when faced with the impossible choice of having no followers or having to be followed by the French, I decided to create a doomed people.
Yeah, biggest revelation: French aren't real.
Yeah.
French aren't real. Okay, this is a piece of lore that I hate so much I pretended didn't happen. That's
Oh,
when you
no.
find out that Fontenoy people,
Mhm.
they are not born and reproduced like people.
Yes.
You have to
Yeah.
wish for them on a fucking fountain to
But it
have a
was
baby.
like, yeah, but it was almost like, did they think that they still had a baby though? Like they wished upon it, but did they still like, was it like a fever dream?
They wish for the health of the child.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So like
got-
that implies that they're already pregnant. Until that scene, it was like, okay, they're 90% people and they reproduce like normal people. It's just that if they touch that grimace shake, they turn back into Oceanids.
And that's what I thought.
Yeah, the deed of making them humans
Hmm.
was way back in the past, and they've just perpetuated like normal humans since then.
People from Fontaine can still have children with people from outside Fontaine.
Yeah, I
Well,
think.
that-
Only if the
my
fountain
interpretation
approves.
Yeah, my interpretation of that was that the Fonch, when they go to have kids at the fountain, they, pray for a child, and then like that causes a reincarnation of the spirit of an Oceanid who is put into the primordial sea to inhabit their child's body and basically make them reborn. Any child not having that done to them is just like a newer entity or falling inside the normal cycle of reincarnation away from the Oceanids.
Oh,
So
so
they
it's
would
just like a
have
normal
never-
human child.
Presumably, I don't know if that means that like the spicy water doesn't work on them or
Yeah, I don't know.
or how that operates. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of the test we'd need to figure it
Mhm.
out.
Because it's like, okay, are you telling me, lore, that ever since the primordial age when Egeria made the first people, that every single couple has wished on that fountain, every single
I know,
couple in
it's
Fontaine forever.
wild
Like
to
all you
think
need is
about.
one person who hasn't done it,
Mhm.
and that's how you get Arlecchino.
I feel like they would have been a lot better served if they had just not mentioned reproduction at all.
Exactly. But then, the other question it also posed was what happens to someone who's been absolved by primordial seawater? Because the idea is like they become an Oceanid and they kind of become part of like the big mass of water. None of them came back to life though.
Yeah, it just adds this layer to the ecosystem that's just
Yes.
dumb, and it's like I would literally just pretend I didn't hear that, and they're for all intents and purposes just humans now.
Yeah. I agree. And the others are just dead. You don't come back to life. Sorry.
Yeah, like you're maybe you're non-sentient water. I don't fucking know.
Some of you died literally 5 minutes too soon.
And also, if you have to wish for your baby, then why are there so many like abandoned, trafficked, and
Yeah.
orphaned children in
Oh,
Fontaine?
well, actually, there is an
Yeah.
explanation for that, and that would be presumably because their parents have been in prison. They just didn't want to leave prison. They didn't get back to their
Yeah.
They
family.
love it.
That's a good point.
They love the prison.
Can you blame them when
Like-
Risley's there? Like that's
Exactly.
honest? Come on.
I mean, like let them eat cake. Am I right? Oh man, Fiends, I forgot to talk about how all the shots we called on our big podcast collab with Dalton and stuff ended up being completely fucking wrong. We're like, oh, they're gonna be like the celestial toadies. And it's like, oh, no, they actually did the most against Celestia that anyone's ever done.
We also don't
Yeah.
even really know where the gods come from. Seems like they're elemental energy, but somehow co-opted by Celestia from what I'm assuming was, the elemental realm that was already there, but which is where the dragons come from.
It seems like people kind of, maybe not people spawned them, but every god we've met feels like it was a pre-existing thing that got kind of promoted by Celestia. Like, I feel like Adepti, for instance, were like some indigenous spiritual entity in the UA. And like Rex Lapis happened to be the one that gets bumped up to middle manager. Because Venti's just like a wind sprite.
Promotion, chess, boom.
Oh fuck! Oh fuck! Oh shit! Oh shit!
Ningguang should have been promoted already then, damn.
Yeah, right.
I super thought that like Liyue 2 would be Ningguang being forced to take on the throne of Geo. Like, I would have thought Celestia is like, you are not allowed to be an Archon-less society. We don't want another Conria. You're coming up in the world. Chop chop, here's a Gnosis. You the boss now. Get immortal. Fuck you.
But do you think Celestia knows that Rex Lapis is still alive?
I kind of don't. I think by the time we finish this AQ, Celestia is like empty.
Yeah, I'm kind of there too.
Yeah.
I feel like we have to knock on the door and check on them at this rate because they
absolutely
they didn't come down to check on Venti, Zhongli, they haven't checked on Nahida.
Yeah, and it's just an AI pumping out the visions.
Yeah.
I think so. Dead ass. Like, even like maybe they weren't even ever in charge of the visions. They just claimed that they were.
What if they're all already dead?
I kind of think so. Near Automata spoilers, but
that's exactly what I was thinking just now. And we know they played it. They fucking copied the weapon animations.
loves Near Automata. I think they're not up there anymore.
They're all just embedded within Paimon.
Oh yeah, God.
Or Paimon's just like their security / surveillance system that's like left over.
The next couple of patches will be kind of the make or break for it because, this was the biggest infraction against Celestia we've seen during the active story of the whole plot. So it's like if they stay really quiet, really big reason to believe that, they're just not up there. But if something else happens, then, who knows?
Do we think we're going to see Arlecchino again in version 4.x?
Well, I'm pretty sure she's going to be rollable in 4.x. Like, I don't see how they could justify, like, postponing that into Natlan or beyond.
Right.
When she's been a character.
Because, like, I feel like
if
she was going to be rollable soon, then we would have seen her fight in the AQ. And, like, seeing her in a cutscene, like, killing monsters or something so you get an idea of what her kit is. I feel like
why does she have hilly hands?
We thought the Caterpillar quest was going to answer that. It actually told us less than nothing.
Maybe she was experimented on by Dottore.
I always go with
him so much. Oh my god!
But we do know one thing about her, though.
What?
Different bitch than the one who ruined Momoyo's life.
Yes.
Oh my god. That's kind of what I think they may end up going back to, is this idea of like being father, if you will, is kind of something that's not elected, but it is handed down at a certain point. So what if her quest ends up being more a part of the House of Hearth? We're like, perhaps, I don't know, there's kid trafficking and Dottore's back trying to take kids to experiment.
That's too interesting. They wouldn't show it on camera.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I believe the previous Arlecchino did not go by father. I think she was only known as the director, and Arlecchino was the father.
I'm hoping that we'll get some more info about the previous Knave when they release a Fremine hangout. Fremine talks a lot about how when he, his dad left him and his mom, and then his mom felt like she couldn't properly take care of him, left him at the House of Hearth until she could quote unquote get on her feet, which never happened because now he's a whole ass Fatui diver man. And the old Knave basically was like, your mother didn't like you, you're a failure, this is your fault that you're here. And so when Arlecchino took over, she was like, no, that's all a lie. Your mom left you here because she loves you, which thinking of a Fatui Harbinger saying anything like that
it's interesting because Fremine has a voice line about father, Arlecchino as father, where he says basically, I love diving because it allows me to be alone with my emotions, because if I ever show them in front of father, he tells me, don't do that, that's weakness. That's
She is not like Smiles and Roses play catch with you in the park. Like, she is still combining the most horrifying traits of a Russian and French father.
Yeah.
Like, strict as all balls. It's just that maybe not as much of an extreme as the previous Arlecchino.
But is
Wild.
there like different branch orphanages of the House of the Hearth? Because
I was wondering.
Alfonso made it seem like it was just very Snezhnayan.
I would imagine that it must be, right? Like,
I mean,
because she's supposed to be like
That is their,
over
like,
all of them,
feeding
right? Or is she
program.
just over like
Yeah.
the Fontaine one?
I think all of them.
Also, like, I don't know if we got clarification. Is the hotel is it literally the Fontenoy branch of the House of the Hearth? I think I saw somewhere back when the lore was like really up in the air and people hadn't figured it out. I saw it on a website, but I could not fact check it. And so I was wondering if that ever like was confirmed or not. I kind of think it not.
Yeah, I don't think so. No.
Boy, we didn't do anything in that hotel.
It just seems weird
Except
because
for eat cake.
weren't Lenny and Lynette like much younger when Arlecchino saved them from human trafficking or whatever? And I mean, was Alfonso's like, could it have been that much longer when he's been on assignment in Sumeru, like kidnapping children?
Here's my thing. Like, this is tinfoil hats, writer's room shit.
We love doing that, so
I think Momoyo's quest was a mistake. I think the previous Arlecchino was invented to like retcon Momoyo's quest.
Yeah.
I think that's likely.
Yeah.
They have way less oversight for world quests, but anytime you invoke a major character or a playable character, you have to be careful with that. And I think the writer of that quest, again, no proof whatsoever, but I think they wrote this not even thinking if they should check to see if that was in line for the company's vision for Arlecchino as a character.
I mean, or it could alternatively be that like they didn't have a vision for her yet. Like,
yeah,
because even up until Fontaine, the voice lines for both Childe and the Moosh Man both say like she's, a self-serving, backstabbing psycho, and then when you get to her, she's like straight up normal sauce. Like,
yeah, she's just a little mean and otherwise completely heroic, except for that one time she tried to jump Furina.
Well, she's still self-serving.
She is very self-serving, though.
She also cares about her kids.
And she only cares about curing the Fontaine curse. I feel like I remember reading somewhere that there are still people who like believe in like the old Knaves.
Yes.
Like path.
That was part of the retcon because Momoyo spawns in Inazuma in 4.0. So if anyone happens to go back 2 regions ago, she says, oh yeah, by the way, the Arlecchino that Alfonso was loyal to, that was the previous one. And she was deposed by the current Arlecchino, but she had these adherents that were so strongly attuned to her vision that they do stuff in her name even to this day. And I was like, oh, you guys just fucked up writing this, didn't you?
Or changed your mind.
No, it's true though.
Also, like when they did the Winter's Nights Lizzo drop and they revealed,
good.
That was when they patched in the pronoun change or the gender change, where they changed Arlecchino's title in the Momoyo quest from Lord to Lady. First of all, she's a butch queen. We know she would have liked Lord.
Yeah, she goes by father.
Yeah. Second of all, like, if that was always intended to be a previous Arlecchino, like, yeah, feasibly they could have gone back and corrected that at the same time her clearly like female design dropped. But I also kind of think that's an indicator that Arlecchino in that quest was meant to be our current father.
I do love her design. She's like serving like, New York power lesbian.
She's a conductor.
Yeah. No, the conductor, like, just the coattails. It's killer.
The ponytail.
I hate the ponytail.
I love it.
But I get why they have it. because obviously they're gunning for her to be playable, and they like to have a
Yeah.
lot of flowy stuff in the back of the playable characters, so they're fun to look at.
I do wish that they had kind of kept her as evil as her previous. Like, we don't have enough playable characters who are just like outrightly evil.
Yeah, I
Like,
agree.
We
have
need
none.
villains.
The Fatui aren't even evil though. They're
I mean,
just-
well, no, we're definitely going to
they
team up
do
with
a
them
lot
at
of
some
really
point.
bad shit, but like,
Yeah.
there's
Well-
their goal isn't to like take over the world. It's like,
But we've heard about the things that the previous Arlecchino like was doing. Like, if you played the Sumeru World Quest where you have to off the Fatui guy after he's like trying to kidnap children and like steal their dreams, like we know that the previous Arlecchino was like cartoonishly evil, and like
Mhm.
I think that would have been really fun to have in a playable character, because the most like kind of maybe not outrightly evil, but at least corrupt or aggressive characters are like Childe and Scaramouche, who are other Fatui Harbinger playables, and like they're good, but I think they did a lot of work to try to redeem their image rather than just accept, yeah, these guys are pieces of shit. Like, it'd be fun to have that dynamic going in.
Mhm.
they have
One
multitudes.
thing I realized,
There is a harbinger that's mentioned. I think it's in the Sir Arthur World Quest that is implied to be pretty bad. And then we also have Dottore, who's scary.
Oh, yeah.
But even
Yeah.
Dottore has like all these other versions of himself, right? So they could easily like turn one of them good or something if they
I would
wanted to
hate
make him
that.
playable.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what we were thinking at
Dread.
the end of Sumeru, is like, first of all, he kills all of his current sections, so that was a little bit of a wrench
We
in our
think
theory.
he does.
We think
Yeah.
he did. That's right. But like,
unless
yeah,
he's
there's an
making a
easy
new one.
there's an easy
Good.
out for that if they ever want to make him playable, which
Mhm.
unfortunately they will likely take, because
Oops,
I
I
don't-
forgot one.
yeah, I don't know if there's like a thing with the player base where they don't like, morally bad or ambiguous characters, or like
We
why
know
they
they
shy away
don't
from
because look at how they talk about Raiden A,
that. That's true.
one of the
True.
most interesting morally gray characters in the playable roster.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I will say that, and I say this all the time, but I think Dottore is the scariest character in the game.
Oh, for
He
sure.
is able to
Yeah.
shapeshift, basically,
Mhm.
and
can
he's a
shapeshift?
doctor.
Oh yeah, remember he shapeshifted into a Frenchman.
Yeah, into
Yeah.
a Frenchman.
That's right.
Don't forget
okay.
he ate an
Mhm.
arm too. He's a cannibal.
He's a
Mhm.
cannibal. I am constantly worried that like he's just gonna show up like at Kale's front door looking like Tignari.
Oh,
Ugh.
God.
Come with
that is a
me.
great nightmare. Oh,
He shows up at their front door, but he's dressed in a big old fat fox suit.
Yeah, that
Like,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Very Five Nights
Yeah.
at Freddy's style. Like
Okay, guys, lore time. One of his fox suit is foreshadowing for killing Tignari and wearing his disguise.
no.
oh, I have to go now. I can't.
Yeah, no one liked that.
Nobody
Hello,
liked that.
Kale. It's time for your lessons.
She's like,
We find out that Tainari died by the lightning strike,
Shut
and he
up.
took his place because we never saw it.
Oh my god.
Let's
It's
go.
like all signs are pointing to Dottore being an Oceanid, but he had nothing to do with this plot line. Like, but if we're looking at the bullet points, like, yeah, you're doing everything that they can do.
Yeah, no,
That's
I
true.
from the way Renee was described in that world quest, I was like, could Dottore really be Renee? And then it's like, nope.
Yeah.
World
Yeah,
quests
nope,
are
different guy.
completely world quests will always be completely divorced from the main story.
yeah.
We
We were even talking recently
will,
about
we will
like-
even make up Arlecchinos to keep them separate from the main story.
The one thing I did like about Meropide was the insinuation that Childe is cool.
Oh,
Childe is allowed to fight in the fight ring, but we aren't.
Yeah,
Like,
right?
that's
Right.
it's so bullshit.
He totally sweet talked them into letting him fight. He was like, "Come
Yes.
on, it'll be fine.
It'll
Look
be
at
fine.
me."
I'm not that strong. I'm expecting.
Hey, please.
There-
I have a
I-
handicap.
I
I'm
will
fighting for two.
Skirk seems
Chilumi
very,
for life. She's the dad of his baby.
Yes.
The mother.
The mother of his babies. He's the daddy seahorse.
Damn, he's gotta shoot that out. Boom. Damn, he's got to shoot that out. Boom. They're very violent when they give birth, actually. It's quite scary.
He's a
perfectly
violent
on
man.
theme.
He's up to it. He's like, what? The strongest person is a pregnant person? Let's go.
Let's go. I mean,
knock me up,
facts.
Lumine. And then Lumine like shoots the eye lasers at him and he's pregnant. That's how it works.
Exactly. So Skirk, I don't know about y'all, but when we got like the teaser of her, I instantly thought of like black butterflies from Bleach, and I don't know why.
Oh, well, she does kind of have that motive. Her hair clip is very much like that.
Yeah.
So I wonder why she loves to hang out in the sea, in the primordial sea, so much. And is that just because it's easily accessible from the abyss?
I would think so. It seems like she's like, oh, I haven't been above ground in a long time. So I imagine she's just like someone who just kind of lives there. I don't know.
It's a weird case because the thing is that she was a character who we've heard about for a decent bit of time, at least as far as like Childe's voice lines go. We meet her, she puts Big Gulp in a Pokeball and then yeets Big Gulp and Childe into a black hole.
So good.
It's so, yeah, we still know like basically nothing about her other than she has a master called Certology who is similar to Gold in status.
We've sort of been waiting to see Skirk a little bit, or there was like always the notion that we were going to see her at a point. And then she shows up. She doesn't say anything that's like particularly interesting other than having some like comments about Big Gulp being kept as a pet. But then she just immediately starts name dropping a bunch of other characters. And it's like, no, you shouldn't be talking about them. There shouldn't be anybody above you. You're the superpowered, space person. Like she's really kind of nothing at this point. But the thing is that also actually makes me want her to be playable like immediately, because that means that we're going to have to expedite this. Like we're going to have like another carrot that's being dangled in front of us, like way down the line. Let's just get to like getting her playable now so we can actually like get to know her better as a character. Because right now I'm just like, this was sort of a huge disappointment for who this character is supposed to be.
Yes. I was hoping that Egeria was still alive, the Skirk would be her, and that, when she made her puddle in Sumeru, that maybe a part of her consciousness had leaked into the abyss and that Gold had found her and helped her get a body or whatever it might be. But Skirk also, I wanted to know if she was the reason that Childe went into the abyss, or was it the narwhal?
I'm sorry, I just picture her like Pennywise in the storm drain. She's like, hey kid, you want to see a whale?
Literally.
Everything gulps down here.
But that's really my question, because he was called to Fontaine, as he said. And we still don't have an answer of what called him specifically, Skirk or the narwhal. We don't really know still what was going on with his vision. We know that he was severely damaged and sent home to Snezhnaya to heal, in which case we gave Arlecchino the vision to return to him, which she better fucking return it to him, where I'm going to have a fit with this woman. And also, we know that now Childe is messenger boy for Skirk. So
part of me, part of me is
who's...
afraid that we're not going to see him again until Snezhnaya.
Yes, that's my fear.
God, it better not, please.
It's not fair because they bring... I say it's not fair, and I'm like the only one on Tales of Teyvat who likes Childe.
Hey, I like Childe. I like Childe. My problem is that you are convinced that he's redeemable, but A isn't.
I just don't like A. I just don't like her.
It's still the same thing.
A doesn't need to be redeemed because there's nothing that she needs to be redeemed from.
A bold statement.
The Shogun is the one that needs to be redeemed in the end.
No, the Shogun only does what A condones her to do.
Well, then
they have both done nothing wrong.
I'm gonna come back to that in our next collab.
The first line of our show is, "So Raiden did nothing wrong." That is literally line one, episode one.
It is true. It is how we opened this show.
In this house, we love A and Childe.
Yeah. Yeah, I really do want to, I'm sad because they kind of baited us with Childe.
Yes.
He was damseled super hard.
Yeah,
he was used horribly in the quest.
He didn't speak after he was imprisoned. He had no
Yes.
talking line, not
Look, he's
one.
on maternity leave.
Yeah.
It makes me so mad to think that Childe was just to trick us into going to Meropide, the worst place ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like Child.
Hey.
No, because that's what I love about him is like he is so contradictory, but like not irreconcilable. Like he's not an angsty man. He fucking loves everything.
Mhm.
Yes.
He loves his family. He loves fighting. He's a violent, loyal, fun dude.
Yeah, the only thing he doesn't love is boredom.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think
Mm.
Skirk's just whole thing is that we all expected her to be like the reveal, and then it turns out she's just the one doing the revealing, but not in a
Yeah.
fun way.
Which
Okay,
was
here's
also,
some more shit.
that was also shocking though in its own way. Like you were like,
Uh.
what? Like I know it's like a negative because we all thought we were going to get this level of lore that we did not get. But it's also like, holy shit, like who is that person? Are they also from Conria? Are they someone who experimented with gold? Are they possibly a member of the Hexen Circle? Are they possibly an ex-member of the Hexen Circle? Is it related back to the Primordial one? Is that person going to be the one who finally ties us officially into Honkai?
Is it Alice?
Is it Alice? Like, there are so many questions.
So this is why I hate Skirk. The further you get into like the cosmology away from Teyvat, the more you are forced to like address Teyvat as something that doesn't exist on the grand
Yeah.
stage. And unfortunately, that's kind of where the strength of their story is very deeply entrenched in Teyvat. I personally, I'm not really into the larger story, like the stuff that Dainsleif alludes to. I think that's kind of the weakest written. And so when it's like in the middle of the Archon Quest, we're going to hijack it and pivot it into this larger scope stuff that is going to cheapen kind of the rest of the setting that you just went through in the AQ, but also not do it substantially enough beyond just like a weird tease. And like we already got our weird tease of people who exist above the happenings of the world in the Hexen Circle and like our second contact with N. And like that, like maybe delving into that a little more kind of would have been better. But then for it to be like go right into Skirk, and then for Skirk to introduce like 3 more people who we've never heard of, who all exist outside of our reality, I'm just like, I think the dawning realization of, oh god, like are we not going to have normal Archon quests anymore? Are we already like blowing
Right.
open the setting? And I'm like, I'm not ready for this.
I see, I'm ready for it. I'm excited, but
Yeah.
I live in that, like constantly thinking
Yeah,
about the
I'm-
bigger, the like, what does it all mean and where did we come from?
I think I'm definitely in the minority.
agreement, but like, I think, and this is gonna dovetail a little bit with a couple different things, but also a lot of cynicism. So, I mean, one thing I don't like about Skirk is that she's kind of moving towards like a more acultural look, and by acultural I mean kind of a little bit more like pure anime, rather than being
Yeah.
like, hey, this is a cultural spin on something, and I really don't like that for her. But also I'm like, okay, so we know Natlan's coming up, and it seems like, you know, they're beginning to discard regional conflicts in favor of looking at like holding the macro plot a little bit more heavily. I'm like, do I really think that they're gonna do the cultures that constitute Natlan justice? Or do I think that they're gonna use them as a platform to break the setting and tell the story
Oh.
that they wanted to do? I'm like, they're probably gonna tell their own story. They're probably not going to, you know, do something that's really culturally whatever goes into Natlan. I don't know.
Yeah.
Which is such a tease, because Natlan is one of the reasons we were excited about Genshin. Is it like,
Yeah,
oh, they're doing Mayan Mesoamerican stuff, and like as recently as Nivulet's Twitter preview text was attributed to Shibalanke, who is one of the hero twins.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
they
I hope that
reference Tanakh. Tanakh! Yeah, Tenochtitlan.
Yeah.
Anyway, I actually do hope that I'm proven wrong, though. I hope they do something that's like
Me too.
really Mesoamerican in a powerful way that's represented. But
I think
I
I'm
hope-
gonna like it more than the Fontaine AQ because I've learned to put my expectations in the toilet.
Come on, the
In the toilet with
toilet.
the Orbeez.
But there was just like a really bad moment where I was looking at Skirk and I was just staring down the barrel of what I thought Genshin was going to be for the next 3 years, and I was like, do I get off now?
Yeah, I think a lot of people were staring at Skirk and wondering if they get off now.
Just like full disclosure, all power to people who like Honkai and Star Rail, but like that's like what I call like the butt anime aesthetic. It's just like anime, and I hate it.
It's fan service.
What are you saying about butt?
Well,
But not even like literal butts. There's just like I always come back to God Eater, which is just like generic stupid anime, like little sci-fi, little streetwear. I hate the type of characters they write for those, because it's just like, I'm a big anime, and Genshin's done so much to be better than just normal anime, and I need to justify playing a children's gambling game in my 30s.
Nah.
There is no justification. Let's be real.
It's true.
There never was. I was just kidding myself.
I think to wrap this up really quick, just everyone, bullet points. What was your favorite thing about Fontaine? Go.
Nouvelette.
Nouvelette, Dragon Dick.
All the crimes.
I always go back to the animals all the time, and I'm gonna include the Melusines in there because Seadrine's probably my favorite. But I love all the interactions with the animals, that they're like now talk to one another, and there's that seagull that like is like basically a meme and like kind of like kicks a dead Hurley Charles. It's hysterical.
You think that's funny?
Yeah, I mean, he's sleeping. He's just asleep.
We do that a lot. Also, dead Hilly Churls are great because that's what we aspire to be.
Until the next reset.
It is canon. Dansleaf said we all want to die permanently.
Mm-hmm.
I would say for me it was Risley and Navia were my favorite parts of Fontaine. I think they both brought a fun level to it.
They're both very good.
I think that Furina ended up being my favorite character in the end, which in hindsight seems probably inevitable, but
they always do good with the Archons.
Yeah,
Even
they
the
always
fake
do good with the
ones.
Archons. And I think that I appreciated the ethic of the setting and world itself. Because there are only a few places that specifically do fantasy France. Like, the only other one I can think of is, like, Dragon Age.
The Witcher.
One of my favorites.
I haven't played The Witcher.
Oh my god, Toussaint is so good.
Yeah, I love a fantasy France.
I think my favorite things about Fontaine were we didn't really talk a lot about the gameplay, but I do think the gameplay was a net improvement, especially because they challenged themselves with the underwater combat and generally did an okay job with it.
Yeah, that's right.
World quests, great.
The world quests.
At a game level, the game just keeps getting better and better. Like, they are learning lessons, and they are applying those.
I love the Narcissan Saga.
Yes.
Oh, that shit's good.
Yeah. The entire Narcissan Saga has been the best world quest they've ever done, and I'm really happy to like see them get to the point where they can like make a really long world quest, but also figure out how to make it really engaging. And then character-wise, Navia and Furina are really up there. Nouvelette at a close third. Hoping to roll all of them.
My favorite was just the emotions of it. They're getting really good at emotional writing. They just need to figure out how to get there better.
Emotions in the oceans.
Emotions in the ocean.
They may not have had the connective tissue, but they had emotions down pat. I have played a bit of Furina's SQ, so it's like, I know you can still write, even though you pretended you forgot how to write during the Fontaine HQ. All right, so this has been
fucking awesome.
A collaboration between Tales of Teyvat, a Genshin lore podcast, and The Shade Chamber, a Genshin not lore podcast. I've been Beefy, one of the Churlmen of the board of the Shade Chamber. You can find our podcast on various podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, the whole shebang. We also do a video version on YouTube, also found at the Shade Chamber. You can get in touch with us at our Twitter, which is Shade Chamber Pod, or contact us at our email address, shadechamberpodcast@gmail.com. What is our pod doing after this? Well, we usually nominally talk more about like kind of the game design and creative decisions that go into Genshin. And so whatever aspects of that we have not gone into here, we will be diving deeper into in our own regular podcast, looking at the aesthetics, the gameplay design, and some other crap about Fontaine that's not AQ related. Because there's a lot of good stuff to be said, and some bad. Anyway, that's us.
And I'm Feaster. I'm from Tales of Teyvat. You can find us on our website, talesofteyvat.com, where you can find comprehensive lore pages for all of our episodes, including this one. There you can also find any links to creators and cutscenes mentioned during the episodes, visual representations of some of the lore mentioned as well. Additionally, you can email us at talesofteyvatpod@gmail.com to share any theories, lores, or questions you have. We can also be contacted on Twitter, Tales of Teyvat, or Instagram, Tales of Teyvat Pod. And you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google, YouTube, and I'm sure there's other places I'm forgetting. For us, we release a new episode every Wednesday, for the most part, unless we're on a break. And in each episode, we cover a different topic. We've covered Dragonspine, Childe, the Sumeru Desert, just to name a few. So we try to do a comprehensive lore episode about each of those topics to try to get as much as we can out there and speculate and maybe throw some crack theories out there and talk about butts.
Hell
Yay,
yeah.
butts.
All right, you guys.
But-
You've been such good sports.
No, thank you
listening
guys.
to
Yes, have
our
a good
drunken
night
screaming.
and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy
Yeah.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy
Happy
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving. Eat
Thanks
that
for staying up till
jade
1.
plume
Sorry.
turkey.
Yeah,
That's okay.
it's
Fine.
fine.
I mean, it was
screwed up.
fun. Hell yeah.
Bye.
Bye,
Good
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Fun.
Later.